To kick things off, we have Article 32, the zoning bylaw amendment for additional dwelling unit, which is to delete and entirely adopt a new section 4.2.2.2 for the development of attached and detached accessory dwelling units. And could Mr. Flint present that for us? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm I'm Burton Flint, member of the Planning Board, and I'm presenting on Article 32, which is a proposed change to the existing zoning bylaw provision pertaining to accessory dwelling units. And let me start by explaining what an accessory dwelling unit is. The classic example would be an in-law apartment, maybe a small studio apartment carved out of a house or above a garage that might be used for your in-laws or an elderly parent that you want living closer to you, or a young person returning home from college, or maybe it would be a non-relative that you might want to be able to rent out an apartment to defray the cost of home ownership, or maybe increasingly in Concord where people are looking to downsize and have more affordable housing options in a smaller home. They might choose to build an accessory dwelling unit, move into that themselves, and then rent out their larger primary residence to, as retirement income or otherwise to defray the cost of living in Concord. And why? Let me start by saying why we're proposing this. In the 2018 Envision Concord Long Range Plan, I'll jump on that. One of the goals stated, goal number 5 stated that we should encourage renovation of existing single-family homes in all zoning districts and identify opportunities to create accessory dwelling units within existing structures in all zoning districts and allow cluster development and co-housing in designated areas. And so with that charge, we looked to see how we could make that more likely to happen in Concord than we currently have. So the proposal is to replace all of section 4222 of the bylaw with new language that allows a building permit to be issued for one additional dwelling unit in a single-family dwelling or a detached accessory structure, subject to certain conditions. We're replacing the entire section primarily because we're editing throughout it, so it makes it easier to make the change by replacing the whole section, but much of the language will in fact remain the same. The objective is to provide small additional rental dwelling units that will not substantially alter the appearance of the town, and to make it easier to develop those units, and to enable owners of single-family dwellings larger than required for their present needs to share space and the burdens of home ownership. The current section 422 allows accessory dwelling units to be created by special permit. That's a very important consideration. So you need to obtain a special permit from the ZBA. And it's got the following requirements these are the ones that are primarily going to be changed. That the lot is at least 10,000 square feet, that the unit is part of the single-family dwelling, it's not in a detached structure, that the single-family dwelling is at least 2 years old, and the accessory unit is limited to 1/3 of the gross floor area of the existing house that's been there for 2 years. And the special permit's non-transferable. Under that provision, have been developed some accessory dwelling units, or certainly there were probably some before the zoning bylaw, a small number, and the regional housing office surveyed those owners to sort of find how are they being used. 64% are occupied by persons non-related to the homeowner, so they're being rented out as apartments. Over 50% have only one occupant, so they do tend to serve people that need smaller families or individuals that want smaller homes. 60% are one-bedroom units or studios, and over 50% have been in existence for greater than 10 years. The proposed changes that we would make is, first of all, rather than having that 1/3 of the gross floor area limitation, it could be up to 750 square feet by right, so as opposed to by special permit. This would mean that you would not be going before the ZBA to get an approval for your permit, but you would have you would need to get a building permit to do this. The 750 square feet was a number that we came up with in discussion and deliberation with the planning board as something that would really constrain this to that concept of an accessory dwelling rather than an additional house, a full-sized house. It could be attached or detached, so this would allow accessory dwelling units to be in barn structures or over garages, a separate cottage, etc. And it could be in any residential district, not just residential districts with 10,000 with lots of 10,000 square feet or more. That 750 square foot limit could be increased up to a hard maximum of 1,000 square feet, but then you'd be going through the same special permit process we have today. The site requirements would be similar to building a single-family house. The lot must meet the minimum size requirements for the zoning district. No more than one accessory dwelling unit is allowed per lot. One parking space must be provided for the accessory dwelling unit. And I'll make a comment on this in that some feedback we got was, well, what about accessory dwelling units leading to the entire lot being taken over by parking spaces? And it's important to consider that there's not currently a limit on the number of parking spaces you could have for your single-family dwelling. So if we put a limit on the number of parking spaces, somebody could simply have more parking spaces for their primary unit, or they would be disincentivized for building an accessory dwelling unit because they would be de facto be putting a limit on parking that did not previously exist. The property must be served by town sewer, or the septic system must be adequate for the accessory dwelling unit's increased flows. The accessory dwelling unit must occupy no more than 750 square feet of gross floor area, again, unless you went through the special permit process to get up to a hard limit of 1,000. Meet the required setbacks for the primary structure, so that it would be just as if you were getting a building permit to build a single-family residence, and meet primary and accessory structure height requirements that exist elsewhere in the zoning bylaw. And the total gross floor area of all buildings on the lot must also conform to the maximum floor area ratio that's separately in the bylaw. There is an owner occupancy requirement, and this is again going to the spirit of keeping this as an accessory dwelling unit rather than separately being a sort of a multi-family, multi-residence development. The owner must occupy either the accessory dwelling unit or the single-family dwelling, and the accessory dwelling unit cannot be sold separately. You could not turn this into a condominium and sell it off as a condominium. It would be retained under fee with the primary residence. And neither the single-family dwelling nor the accessory dwelling unit may be used for a bed and breakfast. And there are other restrictions in the bylaw about short-term rentals and Airbnbs and things of those sorts that would apply to this as well. The application requirements would be to get apply for a building permit with a building inspector, provide dimension floor plans, and a site plan, and no use of or occupancy of the accessory dwelling unit would be allowed until the certificate of occupancy is issued. If you decide you want to go over 750 feet, up to 1,000, or you the dwelling unit would extend into the side or rear setback along from the lot lines, or the lot is below that minimum size for the zoning district in which it is, you'd need to get a special permit, and the ZBA could grant relief, grant a special permit if there would not be a substantial detriment to the neighborhood or derogate from the intent and purpose of the bylaw. And the special permit would not expire and would be transferable. All of these changes, again, are designed to take the existing provision of the bylaw and make it easier for these developments to happen in accordance with the town goals as expressed in the long-range plan. And just for comparison, here are some similar bylaws in nearby towns. I think the important column is to look at it by the process, whether it's by right, which is what we're now proposing, or by special permit. Other towns around here have adopted similar bylaws to allow the accessory dwelling units with not a large number of units developed, but it gives you an example of towns where they have done this. And with that, I will ask if there are any questions or comments, or identifying maybe any gaps that I've left. Yes, please.
In terms of the 10,000, go to the mic. Please go to the mic and then identify yourself and your address and make your comment. Thank you.
Jack Madigan, 215 Prairie Street. In terms of the 10,000 square foot property, was that last chart comparison also with those similar, the other towns? Was that also a similar structure in terms of what they were looking at in terms of 10,000? Were they looking at an acre, or what, was there apples to apples, or was it just in terms of new?
I think that's
development?
those numbers are town-wide in those towns, the total number of accessory dwelling units. I'm not sure on it for a given town whether they're allowed town-wide or whether they are limited to particular zoning districts. Effectively now, ours is limited to particular zoning districts because of that 10,000-foot limit. What we're saying is that this could be done in any zoning district in town now.
Okay, okay.
So that 10,000 limit is in the current bylaw, and we're changing that to being any zoning district.
Rich Feely, 347 Lexington Road. I think this is great, but Section M does prohibit a bed and breakfast, but what's to prevent short-term rentals that don't provide food? You said it's in here, but I don't see it anywhere.
The short-term rentals like an Airbnb that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we all want is exactly what you've described, the retired family, the the single school teacher, whatever it is. But people that live in Concord, what we don't want, I think, is people, somebody Tuesday and somebody else on Thursday.
Right,
And
there's
I just
another-
don't see where that's, and unfortunately, the market for that kind of thing is there. I watch it go by my house on Lexington Road every day, walking from Orchard House into town.
What's the
So-
provision?
Yes, sir. And that's not specifically in this amendment because there's separately in the zoning bylaw a provision prohibiting that use town-wide.
Yeah, and we can actually go to Elizabeth Hughes, our town planner, who can quote the bylaw.
Okay, great. I mean, as long, I was not aware that we had a prohibition here.
Oh, yeah, we do. Pretty
Okay,
strong.
great. Thank you.
Well, okay.
Alyssa Brown, 158 Laurel Street. I'm just confused mostly by my ignorance about how this would work with the setbacks. If like someone decides they want to build a shed, is that a separate setback than the primary house? And if they decide to build a shed and then they decide to have second story be an accessory structure, how does that work?
Burton, do you want to cover that?
Well, Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe accessory structures, depending on whether they're behind the primary structure, have a different setback requirement.
They can
Please
be
correct.
as close as 5 feet away from the edge of the property, but then they can only be 15 feet tall. But the thing that we saw is that if you were going to now take one of those structures and maybe put a second story on it, that might be fine in some lots, but it might not be fine in others. And so this is why there'd be a special permit requirement, that it would give the opportunity for review if there was something, and so that's why we use the primary structure setback, which would be 15, 20, depends on the dimensions of the lot, the zone, district you're in. But we said to be conservative, we'd require primary structure setbacks for any by right construction, and for anything that was in the accessory building setback, which are smaller, they would have to get a special permit.
Okay, so if a house has the primary structure has 20 feet front and back,
Yeah,
this would only allow it 20 feet front and back.
that's right, by right, yeah.
My apologies, I got here a little late, but I'm wondering if you can clarify what you're talking about with...
Oh, you need to identify yourself and address, please?
My name is Michelle Flum. I live on 324 Sudbury Road in Concord, Mass.
Okay.
When I saw that you decided to add this measure of an ADU, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, in my neighborhood is we have a number of new houses that are already being created that take up a good chunk of the lot. They're these big 3,500, 4,000 square foot houses that are coming up, taking away what I see is, the biggest priority, which is to keep our smaller Cape Cod houses, which is like really our more affordable housing stock, allowing people to buy into the neighborhood, and allow other people who may want to stay to age in place. To me, that is the highest priority to have in terms of affordable housing. But that being said, in terms of an ADU, I'm just wondering about the concept of, in this writing, if it looks, I can't remember exactly what the writing is, but it essentially says, depending on where it is and how it looks and whether or not it's not an impact in the neighborhood. So I'm wondering if you could just clarify, in terms of the special permit process and other things, how would you be assessing that impact on the neighborhood?
Yeah, so I could speak to that. So what we're doing is, with this, is we're saying that you get to build that by right. So the planning board or the ZBA would not be doing an assessment unless the applicant was going, as our chair was just referring to, into the setbacks, or they were wanting to go above 750 feet up to 1,000 feet in total size. So that's the big difference, is we're saying that you would be able to build this by right, rather than going through the permitting the special permit process. Excuse me.
But there is some control, which is provided by the dimensional requirements of the zoning district. So depending upon the zoning district, we have height, setback, and the floor area ratio requirements that mean that the building size, collective building size on the lot, can only be so big. There's a hard limit.
So to make that clear, they could, using the exact same external structure, build a house, but by right. What this allows them to do is have it be a separate dwelling, rather than a single dwelling.
But the total square footage can't be any bigger.
Okay,
See what I
because
mean?
that really is an issue in our neighborhood in terms of an impact. And I do think it really takes away from, to be honest, what certain people can afford. So could you just clarify for me before I run away, and I may have missed this and I apologize. Why is it that the town thinks it's so important to put this in place right now? How can I see this as something other than essentially to help out developers and other things? Like, why is it an important priority?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. And it goes, it's exactly why we're proposing this, is because of some of the concerns that I hear in your question, which are expressed in the long-range plan, which was creating more options for smaller, more affordable housing. And part of that is allowing accessory dwelling units, which through the long-range planning process, I think people felt would be less likely to have the impact on town character in the manner that you're talking about large houses. Ultimately, any sort of development is only going to happen when it's profitable to somebody who's doing it. And so to encourage smaller housing, you've got to create alternative methods or models of development. And that's what the accessory dwelling unit, that's what we're intending to do by making it easier to develop accessory dwelling units.
So you see this as a way to complement, essentially, the victory houses and other Cape Cods that we have to create another small-ish unit that people can buy into.
Like the Daniel Chester French Studio.
Well, if I could...
Very much.
Yeah, okay. Any others?